Hello, my name is Shirley Reeder. I am an interviewer for the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County. I am interviewing Ray Cunningham today, September 6, 2006, at the Anderson Library. Our camera operator today is Michael Alfieri. Also present is Dolores Kesson. Mr. Cunningham and I have been chatting a little bit already. And Mr. Cunningham, could you tell us a little about your background before you served in the Second World War? Where you went to school and everything?
Yeah, I was born actually in Norwood, Ohio. And then from there, my brothers, when they moved to, they were in Mount Adams. I was actually raised in Mount Adams. And I went to grade school there at the Backlot School, Backlot Church.
Okay.
After that, I went to Building Vocational School, where my brothers went. I kind of followed in their footsteps. And I graduated from there, and I tried to get a job. I was too young, so I took another postgraduate course at the school. And after about another year, then after that, I got a job working at a tool company in Norwood because of the war effort.
Right.
And when I was called up for service, I went down to the draft port, and I had been operating a turret lathe, and you breathe all the fumes that were on it, coming from it. And I had congested chest, and as a result, the fellow at the draft port, or not the draft port, but the fellow at the office down there, said, get out of that job at the tool company and get a job outside. Well, I was making $36 a week then, and just married about a year. And so what I did, I took a job driving a truck. And I did that for about 6 months, and I got rid of my cough that I had. I was feeling better. The opportunity came up, so I got a job at the post office, because my father worked there. And so I went into the post office, and I worked there all up to about 1944, yeah. And anyhow, at the post office, then I decided to, I reported back to the draft board after they rejected me at the separations of the center, recruiting center, and I reported to the draft board, and he said, what would you like to do? And I said, well, I want to join the Navy. He said, wait, he pulled out my records. He said, you're in the Navy. I said, what? He said, yes. He said, you've been in the Navy. You went in at such and such a date. I said, no, that was my brother that went in. He said, well, your brother? He said, no. He said, it was you. He said, Brady pulled it out. And sure enough, I was right. They had me in there, and they lost my records. They had me fixed up with him. So he said, holy mackerel, he said, raise your right hand. He said, what would you like to be? I said, well, I want to get in the Navy. He said, raise your right hand. I raised my right hand. He swore me into the Navy on the spot. He said, when would you like to go in? I said, well, it was around Easter. I said, the day after Easter, which I think was April the 11th of 1944. So sure enough, I went down to the Navy headquarters, and while we were in there, a Marine come in, and he started looking through us. He picked out about 4 or 5 of us and took us across to the Marine Corps, and he says, you're in the Marines. I said, no, I'm not. I'm in the Navy. He said, oh, no, you're not. He said, you're in the Marines now. About that time, a Navy officer came into the office, and he said to the fellow, he said, you can take any of those men over there. He said, but you can't touch this man. He said, he's already our man. He's in the Navy. That Marine sergeant, he didn't like that at all. So I wound up going to the Great Lakes. I went through boot training, and I had a wonderful officer. He was in charge of us. And his name was Paul Brown, who was later the owner of the Cincinnati Bengals.
Oh my gosh.
So he was a great guy, and he took us to all the sporting events when we was up there. So after I had completed boot camp, I went for interview. They sent me to an engineering school, basic engineering on the Great Lakes itself. I went through the training there at Great Lakes, and then from there they shipped us to Richmond, Virginia for advanced diesel training because they were going to make me a motor machinist mate. So we completed our training at Richmond, Virginia. Then they put us on a train. It took us 4 days and 5 nights to get to San Diego. And when we got there, we were based on Del Coronado, this is strip at San Diego, at the Silver Strand. And there we went into extensive training, both with more or less with the boat handling and the mechanisms of the various boats that we were going to be working on. And we learned the fundamentals of riding the landing craft. We'd take them out, and we had practice almost every day with the boats. We got to familiarize ourselves with them, as a result why we were all set. Then we got word that our ship was done. So from there we went on up to, I think it was San Francisco, where we picked up our ship. It was assembled in the Richmond Navy Yards. It was named after a county down in Florida, Okaloosa, which is an Indian name. And we was the 219th ship that they had built. They were going to build say another 30 ships, or 40 ships. Let's see, 30 I think it was. But there was the end of 249. Anyhow, we went on board the ship, and we took it out for training and so forth. And took it on a shakedown cruise. And we just went up and down, practicing and so forth with it. Get our routines in. Then we went to Seattle. From there we picked up a load of troops, of our Army troops. And we took them, where we went to, first of all we took them to Hawaii. Then we took them, so we moved troops around so much I can't remember exactly where this group probably wound up. Although I did come across a schoolmate I went with at Building High School with the board. Pardon me. And we had went to school together, so we went to our parents and my wife. I was married. And they got together back home, and they became steadfast friends all during the war. So from there we went on to sea, and we went to training with troops then, and with practicing landing and so forth. It seemed like we just got moving from island to island, picking up training. We spent a lot of time in the Philippine Islands, and well, to back that up slightly, we picked up troops to take into Okinawa, and we got there. We went with the convoy, and as a result, we landed our troops without incident. We was on a safe beach because they were pretty well secured. The beach wasn't that dangerous where we were. Orange Beach too was. And as a result, at nighttime, that's where we caught it, because that's when all the Japanese Betties were coming over and bombing us. And we went through, let's see, in 5 days we went through 26 bombings of aircraft at night. And we had converted 2 of our landing craft. Incidentally, we had 24 LCBPs, that's about 36-foot long landing craft that hold 36 passengers, and 2 LCMs, which are a little heavier. They would carry up to, that's tank. Each one could carry a tank or a truck, and we could carry a Jeep if need be. But anyhow, we took our licks there. There was a lot of ships floating up. I can't name the name of the ships or what happened to them, but we were assigned to taking the taxi service there for a while, and we took a passenger emergency passenger out to the hospital ship, USS Comfort, and dropped him off. But we thought we had to wait for him. And so we just hanging around, and then all of a sudden the ship started taking off. And Coxswain said, "What do we do, Ray?" I said, "Well, you know, the Navy, follow their orders, stick with them, you get secure." So we started following, and they slowed down, and they told us to come alongside, which we did. And they said, "What was the matter?" I said, "Well, we were not secured, you know, thought we had to wait for this passenger." They said, "No, you're secure, go on back." Well, we went on back, but when we got back, it was dark. And going into Okinawa Bay, dark at night, if you bumped into anything, you were shot. Anything moving in the water was going to be shot, because they figured they were the Japanese bum boats, as they called them, B-U-M. So we shut off our engines so they wouldn't hear us. And we knew we were in the bay, and all of a sudden we kept hearing this sizzling. And I said, "What is that, Red?" Here we find out a shrapnel that's fallen down on us.
Oh, gee.
So we duck underneath what they call the stern sheets. That's the only place part where they cover. And we was hiding down there to keep the shrapnel from falling on top of us. We had our helmets on. And all of a sudden, bang, we hit it at something. And I thought, "Heavenly days, what is that?" It's all. I said, I was afraid to look. So we peeked out, looked up, and all I could see was the bridge, the stack. And on the stack was painted a Japanese flag. The Heavenly Days, it's an American ship, you know. And sure enough, it's an LCI, Landing Craft Infantry. And so we tied up on the side of it. Nobody came, nobody said anything, they didn't answer. So we climbed on board, went down to the mess hall. Here the baker was out there, he was baking bread. So we were hungry. We hadn't eaten for a number of hours, so he fed us. And after he fed us, we sat around talking for a while. And we went back to our boat, spent the rest of the night in. In the meantime, they radioed our ship that they found us and where we were, that we could report in the morning. And he gave us a compass bearing where our ship was located. After that point, we took off and got back with the ship itself. So, then we went on to different ports and so forth, all the troops, moving around, we went through storm, and so forth. And take a break.
And you said you had several brothers in the service?
Yes, I did. I had 3 brothers in the service. One was in the Army. He was fighting at the Battle of the Bells. He was a military policeman. And later on, he got a job in the post office. He was a guard. So the other 2 brothers, they were both in the Navy. One was in the Amphibious Corps. The other was on the battleship New Jersey.
Okay.
And I was in the Amphibious Corps.
And I believe you said that you ran into your brother on the New Jersey.
I did. We were down in Ulithi, and our ship was anchored out in the bay, and we had to go pick up the mail for the ship. And between us and the mail was the battleship New Jersey. She was anchored, so I asked my coxswain if he'd stop by the battleship, drop me off. I'll visit my brother. You can go pick up the mail, come back, pick me up, and get back to the ship. I said, okay. So I got permission to come on board. And they told me where he might be located. I went down there and for his compartment. But they said, no, he was working on the gun tub up on the stern. So I went up there. And sure enough, I could see his back up because he has his name stenciled across the back of his shirt, Cunningham, so I snuck up behind him. And I guess that gun tub is about waist high. And I slapped him so hard, I was so excited, he almost fell into it, and I had to grab him to pull him out. So he turned around, he was ready to belt me because he thought somebody was playing a trick on him. when he saw it was me, he was so surprised he couldn't talk. But at that very same exact moment, general quarters, ding, 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 all hands, man your battle stations. Well, he took off like a rocket, so, as well as the rest of the crew for their battle stations. So if you're a visitor on a Navy ship, something like that occurs, you should report to the quarterdeck. That is where you came aboard ship. And report to the officer of the day there and for orders. So I made my way down to the quarterdeck and I spoke to the officer and he said, "Do you know where your brother is?" I said, "Yes, he's in that gun tub up there, about, I guess, 2 decks up or 3 decks. He said, "Well, go on up there with him, stay with him." So I said, okay, so I started climbing up this ladder to get to him. But just about the time I got up there, the all clear sounded. I didn't even get to say hi or goodbye to him. When the all clear sounded, everybody was going back to their position. I'm coming back down the deck, and they paged me over the loudspeaker system, "Your boat has arrived." So I had to get down there, and they got back from the nail run. They were waiting for me, tied up alongside the ship. So then I went on board the landing craft. We went back to our ship with the mail. And I don't think I said over 10 words to him all the time I was there. And then about, I guess maybe 3 or 4 months after that, our ship moved into an anchorage in the Sea of Japan occupation. And we were trying to get ready for, there was a storm brewing, a hurricane. And anyhow, it was rough riding. As the ship came in, and we heard over the PA system we had to move our anchorage to a different anchorage about a good quarter of a mile away, which we did. And what ship do you think it was coming in to park there? It was the New Jersey, with my brother on it. Here we were, side by side, maybe about a half mile between us, 3/4 of a mile. And all the time, there was no way to communicate with them. Neither ship would accept any message from the other ship. And as a result, I didn't get to talk to him. I didn't get to meet him until after I was discharged and got back home in Mount Adams. So it was quite an experience.
Right, sounds like it. You said you transported ships to the Battle of Okinawa for that was one of the actions that you transported ships to. You have a battle star for the Okinawa.
Oh yeah, we took troops into Okinawa.
Can you tell us anything about that?
I think I mentioned that before, about we led the troops at Orange Beach number 2. We had a good officer, but I questioned his backbone. I guess I shouldn't say that, but when the time came for action, he got sick all of a sudden.
Oh dear.
And another guy was put in charge, and he never was in charge of the boat group. And he didn't exactly know what he was doing. And we had a load of troops on board, and we took them in. We were supposed to hit Orange Beach too. As we go in, we laid off the beach, and this officer, temporary officer that was in charge, he had a bullhorn and he kept calling in, "Is this Orange Beach too?" Every time he called that, we were fired upon.
Oh, gee.
So they started again, "Is this Orange Beach too?" More fire.
And these were Americans firing on you, or
Yeah.
our side, the Allies.
It wasn't American fire, it was enemy fire.
Oh, okay.
And anyhow, my troops were getting restless, and we had it in a boat. And I had a machine gun with me, and we were in about 20 foot of water. And these troops were getting restless, and they thought we were a lot closer to the shore than we were, and they would want to climb over the side and go into the water. Because, and I know if they did that with their packs on, they were dead, because they couldn't swim with them. So I just jumped up on top of the engine mount there with the machine gun. I shouted to them, I said, "Keep your heads down." I said, "Now the first one that goes over the side is going to be dead before he hits the water." And boy, they all shrunk down. So I said, "We'll get you in." And my coxswain, he had a sixth sense about those things. And we drifted away from the crew. We were on to our right, so maybe about a half mile or a mile. But sure enough, we found Orange Beach too. So we landed our troops. Then we went back and got the rest of the group and brought them back there to the right beach. And I always have my doubts about the officer who was in charge of me.
Yeah, really.
He quit now, but it gave us quite a scare. We, at night when we would have attacks, they would come over during the night because they liked to bomb us at that time, because when we fire our tracer shells, they could follow the shells down to the ships. And I know one time we were firing, our captain said, cease firing. Another ship nearby took up fire. They just switched from our tracer fire to his, and they hit him. I'm pretty sure they sank him because he wasn't there the next day. But anyhow, to alleviate that during the daytime, we had mounted smoke generators on the back of two of our landing craft. And they burned, I guess, fuel oil or something, coal oil. And they would put out a tremendous amount of smoke. Well, we would get these two boats opposite each other, one on port, one on starboard. And they would just keep circling the boat like that. And put down a smoke screen that they were hiding us. And the rest of the boats had the same apparatus on for their boats. And that whole harbor was just covered with black smoke, and you didn't fire any guns, and they couldn't see you, so that was your safety.
Well, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
When you got the troops close to shore, now did you put them on the landing craft to get onto the beaches?
Oh yes, yeah.
Because the ship couldn't go in, right, that far?
No, the ship stayed out in the bay.
Right.
They usually drew cargo nets over the side. We had three ports on one side, 3 ports on the other side where they could climb down. And the troops would climb down into the nets into the boats. And the Navy had where you go in circles out there where you're waiting for them. And the way it worked out, it's about the third circle, you were headed toward the ship. And when all of a sudden, if you saw one of those landing spots along the ship, they hold up a sign or something, or they call your PA system, take number 2 port. You'd be the next one, then you go right to that section, pick up your troops, or not, continue to circle until you got them all lined up. And then you get your orders and you go out and hit the beach.
Okay. When you were in Okinawa, did you, did you have any experience of the battle there at Okinawa?
Not really. The only thing we had was, I just take that back, we were machine guns, I know, because one of our troops, he got the Purple Heart. I don't know if a shell casing hit one of the glanced off and hit him, something like that. I didn't know at the time he got it, but I heard later on that he did. Yeah, we were scraped. I know when we were on board the deck, we took out we weren't in the water, we was on board. I had a watch station, a fire hose, a number 2 hatch, and I wondered if these planes come over, what would I do? Because we had a winch there that was raised up off the deck about that high, about that wide. It looked like a U, and the winch sat on top of that. And I looked at that space underneath there, and whenever you have drills, I tried to get under. I couldn't get under. But when they say hit the deck, I got under that thing. Believe me, I did.
I'll bet.
I don't know how I did it, but I did.
It's amazing what we can do when we need to, right? And you also took troops into Leyte in the Philippines, is that right?
So you
Took troops into Leyte in the Philippines?
we didn't take them into action. They didn't have any action at that point, but we were training with them. And we were training them for the invasion of Japan, which was scheduled.
Right, right.
But we did have other troops there that we had moved around and so forth and kept busy. But that was about it there.
Now, you were probably aboard ship at the time of the surrender. Do you remember when you heard about that?
Oh, the happiest day of my life. Yeah. Matter of fact, we were training for the invasion of Japan at the time in Leyte Gulf, incidentally. We had our troops on board. when it came out that day that the Japs had surrendered. And as a result, a great sigh of relief come over us, because what we were training for was the invasion of Japan, which was coming up awful fast and so forth. But yeah, it was a very, very happy day that day.
Do you remember hearing about the atomic bombs being dropped, and did you have any thoughts on that, what that was going to mean?
Yes. Matter of fact, we had taken some troops up into Manchuria, and on our way back, we come past, and we passed I think it was Hiroshima. It was one of them, but anyhow, it was recruised past on the ship to announce what it was and so forth. And it was, why the whole hillside was all black, burnt black as a result of it. And I envisioned that if it would happen to a place like Cincinnati, if you stood up behind the Catholic Church overlooking the Mount Adams, overlooking the Ohio River toward Kentucky, and all of the Kentucky that you could see from that vision point would have been scorched black. That's the danger that happened there. But that was a gigantic decision that the President Truman made, and you couldn't begin to tell how many lives it saved rather than how many lives it took. I know it took a lot, it's sad, it had to happen, but it's either a case of it's either you or the enemy, not which shall it be. And that decision weighed on his mind when they said they would have casualties similar to the ones they had over on D-Day. And he had to weigh those two, and he said it made the choice a lot easier for him. I read his history and so forth, and I was forever grateful for that man for saving so many lives as he did. And I didn't mean to be selfish, but I happened to be one of them on that day, and I keep him in my prayers. Thank you.
I know that I have heard that Margaret Truman, for years afterwards, people would come up to Margaret Truman, his daughter, and say, I want to thank you, you saved my life, you saved my father's life, and even today, because I think she's still alive. But anyway, on to the transporting. How many men did you take? I know you transported mostly from the West Coast up over in Hawaii and on
You mean
east.
all told?
Yeah. Well, each time, just how many were on board each ship?
It varied. Like, we'd have a special order to have just so many go or pick up them in.
Mm-hmm.
But generally we carried around 1,500. So we had a crew of a little over 500 aboard ship, because each boat took 3 men to operate it. And then besides that, you had to have the people that stayed aboard ship to man the winches to let them get out of the water, take them up and down. And on top of that, then you had to hit the ship's crew, because they took care of the engine and so forth, and the fire, the boilers, or whatever, to keep it going. So we had over 500 in our crew. That is all told, I think. And we kept us pretty busy, but it was all harmonious.
Did you have a specific job, or did you learn to do a lot of different jobs on the ship?
Oh, I learned to do a lot of different things. I'll tell you what, I can, to this day, I can't figure it out. I was put in a classification of, I think it was Y6, the V6, whatever it meant, and I couldn't find out. But I had, actually, one of my jobs was filling the oils. We had a big stick for oil, for oiling the bearings, the main bearings of the ship, way down in the bowels of the ship. And our propeller, or our shaft, was about that big around, and it seemed to be solid brass. And they had about every 8 or 9 feet, they had a oil cup that fed the bearings, constant flow of oil. You had to see that those bearings were filled, that you got oil down there. and you had to get down there and fill those barrels. You may have 3 or 4, maybe even 5 oil cups that you had to fill to keep full, to keep that shaft lubricated. It was a kind of a hectic job because you were down there, it was pitch dark except for a single light. It was like one light bulb down there for the whole alley, shaft alley. And it went from the stern, where the propeller was, up forward to where the bulkhead was, that went into the engine room, to where the engine served that shaft. And the place to get to it was on the back on the afterdeck, number 5 hatch. That was, you climbed into like a tube. Could have been about 3 foot around, but it had a ladder built into it. You climbed down that ladder. You hit the bottom. You hit near the bottom. You had to jump off to the side because you were right over back into the center of that shaft that was turning. And if any of your clothes got caught in that shaft, no one would have heard of you. So you had to get off centered there and get down, fill up your oil cans, and fill each one of those containers. Then kind of swing up over the top of that shaft, get a hold of that ladder, and pull yourself back up to another. It was down maybe, I'll say 3 decks, maybe 30 feet, 35 feet, something like that. And I also had, I don't know why they picked me, but they put me on emergency steering aft. And all I did back there was to, on the start of the ship, on one deck above the main deck, was where the emergency steering was. You had a steering wheel that you would turn. You had a inclinometer, which is held directly, and it would say remain still while the ship was swinging back and forth, and had a gauge that would point down to how much you were rolling. And during this one storm, I called the bridge. I said, "Bridge, it's a bridge eye." I said, "Our inclinators were hitting the pin on both sides. We're rolling 45 degrees. And he said, "You're lucky." And I said, "Well, why would I be lucky?" He said, "Well, we don't have any pins and ours up here on the bridge." He said, "But what we do have," he said, "is that we took them out. And we're actually rolling 51 degrees each time we make a roll." So that was a little bit frightening. We had a compass there with the, had a rheostat on it. You turn it to make it brighter or something, but it would be green because they didn't want that light to show at nighttime. You had to turn it on. But all your job there was to maintain temporary control of the ship, and something should hit the bridge to knock out the main steering parts. Because these would be available at the stern, and they would be connected. So you could knock out the bridge and still steer from the stern. And all I had to do was, or we had to do, we had 4-hour shifts at that, would be to be there if it happened, until you get a crew back there that was familiar with it, and they would take over the handling of the ship at that point. Yeah, it was very interesting. Then from there, they looked for volunteers for the CIC room, and I volunteered. That's Combat Information Center. That's where, the brains of the ship were. All controls were from that point. They had the big plotting table there. They plot the route they were on. And generally, we were the flagship every time we had a transport group move out. Our captain was a full captain, and I think he was a West Point man, but I can't remember if he was or not, but he should have been. He was great. But that whenever we go out for the trip for invasion or landing somewhere, that we would also, or in dangerous waters, put it that way. We would have 4 picket boats. They were destroyer escorts. 2 on each side, 4 to starboard, 4 and aft. And they would report anything that they would pick up with their radar, because they had a further range than from that point that we have with our ship from the center. And that they would report anything, or they would be our armed group that was with us. Although we were capable, we had enough guns on our ship to maybe ward off an attack. But then again, when you got that many ships piled together, that you're an easy target. So they needed somebody to write down the messages but they would call in over the PA system. They didn't have any recordings for that at the time, so it had to be written in pencil. I had a pad, I'd sit there all during that watch. As soon as I hear one I report, I had to report who it was that called, where they were located, what they saw, and what the time was. And just write it down on this board, a logbook like. And then the captain, his quarters were right off of the CIC room, because he had to be at their beck and call at the moment. And he was sleeping at the time. And a lot of times, excuse me, he'd get a message, and they would dart out, and he'd dart out of his cabin. First thing he'd do is pick up my board and read it. Then he'd go ahead and park his message, what orders had to take place. And I found it kind of strange. I worked from the top to the bottom, before and aft. So it was quite an experience. I was very, very happy with it. Thank you.
Now, you were telling me that the captain himself, though, once you got to the harbor, he wasn't able to, he didn't take the ship into the harbor. You had a pilot?
You have what they call a harbor pilot.
I thought that was interesting.
And their job is to bring a ship in from the sea into the docking that they're tying up the ship. Because the territory around the dock, it could be shallow, they have rocks, they have certain places they have to avoid, and the only one to have charge of that and so forth would be the harbor pilot. And as a result, I don't care what port that major ship goes into, they always have to lay off the shore until the harbor pilot comes out, gets on board the ship, and takes it in. He doesn't actually steer it, but he does give the orders to steer it to where they have to go. And as a result, when we brought a group, task force up to land in Yokohama. This was after the war ended. We were bringing the troops in to take over Japan. We had a flock of Army troops on board. And so, again, the captain called our ship, or our boat, to brief us on what we had to do. And they said, you go in, pick up the pilot, bring him back here. He said, we're going to give you a machine gun. And he said, if you meet any resistance, use it. Aye, aye, sir. So then he gave us a great big American flag. It was bigger than a normal flag. And we mounted it on our boat hook and we tied it to the front bow of our landing craft. And in the meantime, we had, I think, about maybe 8 ships out there laying at anchor. Well, they didn't drop their anchor. They just laid 2 out in the water. They were floating. So we went in to start bringing these ships in. So my coxswain, Claude Easley from California, my deckhand, Charles Field, he was from around the LA area, and he was a deckhand, and I was from Cincinnati, Ohio. I was the engineer. So we went into they gave us a heading to go into the dock at Yokohama. And the dock was a big concrete letter like shaped like a big U. And you went in it, and the walls were maybe 30 feet high, and it was square. If one end was open, you bring the ship. It was big enough to bring 2 ships inside, one on each side in that dock. And that's what we had to do. So when we went in there, we didn't know wherever, we knew where we were going, but what we had to do. But as we come down there, we were down through the, right in the middle of the dock. We approached it slowly, and we were starting to look for this captain. But as you look up at 30 feet all around, there's all civilian people standing crowded on that dock. They were down there to see what was going on. All I know is they were filled wall to wall. And I was afraid that one of them get pushed over the side because there was no fence or railing around that dock. And all of a sudden, the deckhand, I said, I think I see our man, Ray. And here, built into the dock was a ladder coming down with steel rungs in it. And halfway down that dock was a guy hanging and waving his arm. So I said, now how do we get him to understand? So we laid to, that is, we stopped, and we stopped about partway in, and I pointed to him, then I pointed back out to the ship, then I made like a wheel like I was steering it, and then went like that, it was like this. And he shook his head yes. I thought, okay. So we went in, picked him up, and he sat on the engine mount, and we took him back to the ship. And that's when we started moving our whole fleet into the dock. Everybody was happy. I found out later that we only had one reunion that was in Indianapolis a whole number of years after the war. And I was talking to some of the guys who was up in the bridge when we brought that man aboard, that captain. And they said that the mess attendants brought a plate of sandwiches up for the crew up in the bridge. He saw that plate of sandwiches and he started eating. He said that he ate every sandwich that was on that plate. The poor guy was really hungry. So he got the ship in all right.
So these were the occupation troops you were bringing in
We
at
were
this
bringing
point?
occupation troops in.
Okay.
First thing they do, they have to clear all the people off the docks. Because this fellow spoke Japanese, and he could tell them over the bullhorn, you know, that they wouldn't bring the ship in until they all were off the dock. They cleared the dock in the area that they brought us in. Well, when they bring you in a place like that, you got to, if you're going in on the starboard side, which is the right side, you got to take all your boats that are hanging on that side off, because otherwise they're going to hit into the dock. And you'd have three or four boats that you'd have to get out of the way if you get in the water.
Landing grab boats, you mean?
Yeah.
Right, okay. That's very interesting. There were probably quite a few troops involved even in the occupation, right? You took quite a few over for the occupation forces.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people forget about that. We had quite a few people over there several years after the war, right?
Right, yeah. They stayed there for a long time.
Just to kind of police things, and there were still, I guess, some Japanese in the hills that didn't know the war was over, right?
That has happened. Matter of fact, that happened down in one of the small islands. It was, don't hold me to this, I think it was down the Caroline Islands, where we kept it a secret. We went in there, not our ship, but the Navy itself. They didn't tell anybody that they took over this town, or this harbor. And as a result, Japan kept shipping their ships down there, shipping and working their way into this harbor. And after they got into the harbor, we just took over. I don't know whether they sank them or, but they were captured, all of them. It said that's the case where a slip of the lip will sink ships. So everybody had to be quiet what you saw and so forth. Of course, that was back then. I hope I'm not overstepping my bounds now.
No, not at all. I thought it would be interesting. People might like to hear about this. You were telling me about the initiation when you went over the equator. And, I thought
yes.
that might be interesting.
Well, we went to Biak, New Guinea. That's it's south of the equator, not that far over, but far enough that if you had any polywogs on board ship, you had to christen them into a cult called the shellbacks. If you crossed the equator, you became a shellback if you were initiated. If you didn't, you were a shellback. And as a result, these the shellbacks, they were pretty numerous aboard our ship because we didn't have that many trained troops on board our trained crew on our ship to begin with. We were all rookies, more or less. I'll say the ratio was about, say 5% was shellbacks and 25% was all polywogs. polywogs meant you're getting across the equator. But they gave us an idea of the date when we're going to cross it, enough money, so we were, all polywogs were ordered not to appear on the main deck, second deck, deck number 2, because they were getting ready for our initiation. And the night before the initiation, you were served with the summons, and they trumped up anything to say, you know, I was charged with impersonating a motor Mac, which I was. Not impersonating, well, maybe I wasn't that. But anyhow, you got your summons to appear before the King Neptune in this court. So you were instructed to not wear any, I think we were allowed to wear shirts. No, maybe we were, but you had to be barefoot. The next morning they got up there and they had plates of metal, thin sheet metal, laying on the deck, on the hatch, the number 2 deck, in the shape of an L. And that's what you had to walk on. They had to charge the with batteries. That every once in a while they throw the switch and the electric would hit the battery, which magnetize these plates you're jumping. You're barefooted, boy, you're jumping up and down the hopper, you know. So that was one of the things they had. They didn't turn that on too often. But you were brought before the court. They had all of them there. And they had I think the fattest guy aboard ship, he sat down cross-legged in front of the royal court. And he was called the royal baby. And they took a slab of bacon rind. I don't know where they got that, but they put it across his belly and they tied it with the rope. And you come up and you more or less confess what you did, you impersonated and so forth. And they said, well, kiss the royal baby. Well, you had to bend down and kiss the baby on the belly with the slab of bacon grease was. And then, in the meantime, the jester there had a pitchfork, and he jammed you through the end. And if you hollered ow, then you had to take a sip of the baby's bottle. They had a bottle with a nipple on it, and they had vinegar in that. You had to take a sip of that. Well, then they had several different ways they could punish you. One, you could go to the stockade where your arms were put in your head. They could do anything they want to you from behind because you couldn't see who it was. They also had 2 coffins they built. One was half filled with garbage, and the other was just plain. And they could sentence you that you had to go there, you had to roll around 3 times in the garbage. Then hop over to the other, and then they'd hose you down. And technically, they lid would come on, and they had a hole drilled at about 2 feet up from the bottom, and the same hole about a foot and a half from the top. And they said they would put water in one end so they'll pop out the other end, and you rolled around and got clean. Well, I don't think they ever reached that magnitude, but that was the object. Then if you were sent to the royal surgeon for surgery, and you were bird chest, that's right, we did have our shirts on, I think. But they had they had wired up to a battery, and it made like look like electric type. There was a sharpness there, but it looked like metal. And they would draw it across your chest. They'd do it. One of the attendants there with the group, he would squirt mercurochrome along that blade. You swarmed that you were being cut, but you feel that pain and see that red. That was another threat. Well, if you survived that, then you were sent to see the royal barber. He said your hair was too long. So during the night before, all the shellbacks got together and they built a temporary, looked like a swimming pool on the deck of the ship. And it was about, I'll say, 20 foot square. And it was up about 4 foot, but they only had about half of that filled with water because they lined it with canvas, and canvas holds water. But on the edge of that, they had mounted facing the royal court on the hatch, a barber's chair, and you sat in it. Had hinges on it. And then there was a barber on each side, and one would take grease and rub it all through your hair. And then the other guy, he'd take a scissors and he'd cut your hair with the scissors. but there was a shears more like. When they got done, they would take it, say, okay, it's your bath. And then they'd flip that chair and it would flip over backwards and you go sprawling backwards into this tank of water. And they had 3 or 4 guys, shellbacks in there that would grab you and push up and down like they were wrenching you out of a piece of clothing until you were able to holler shellback. When you hollered shellback, now you were fully initiated. But you're in misery. And then they'd pick you up, and on the side of the, one side of the pool, they had a ramp made out of plywood that's for the deck level down to the deck, or for the top of the pool down to the deck, and if it's greased, they just put you on there and you slid down automatically. But you had to go through a line. If the rest of the shellbacks were lined up along that line, that you slid down across the shellbacks, and they would beat you with paddles and straps and everything they had. And boy, you tried to scramble and crawl, but you were slipping all the time and you couldn't crawl because your knees had grease on, the floor had grease on, and somebody gave you a push. And, well, it would take about 3 days to get all that
Oh my gosh.
grease nut out of your hair. But then you got your document, so you know what you were going to be. You're a shellback now. Boy, just wait till it gets to be my turn, they'd all say. But fortunately, the war ended, and I'm glad to give that up.
Now, does this still go on in the Navy?
It does. I can't say that for sure, but I would imagine that it would. I would imagine it would. It's a tradition with the Navy.
But I think even when any ship crosses the equator, they do something to the people.
I imagine they would, yeah. It would be as elaborate as that.
Yeah, maybe not quite as
Or
elaborate.
as painful, or as greasy.
Man, did everybody survive this?
Oh, nobody was hurt. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
This kind of sounds like a fraternity initiation.
It was all fun. It was fun, you know. But yeah, they all survived. No danger.
I guess I would like to know if there's anything that you would like of your experiences, or just what you learned through your war experiences, that you would like to pass on to future generations.
Well, the one thing I like to pass on to the generations who are eligible, they say, join the Navy and see the world. And you will. You will. I never, as a boy, dreamed I'd hit all the places I've been into. I've been to all the islands out there. There's numerous islands. The Philippines. And in and out of the Philippines so much. We've run along China. Matter of fact, we took Marines into China, which reminds me, I didn't get to mention this before, but we went into Tsingtao, China. I think they have a beer by that name now, Tsingtao. As I understand it, it was a former German colony that had this, similar to the British have Singapore. I could be wrong, but this is what I heard. But we went in there, and we had to bring Marines in there, rather relieve us, I think to back them up and so forth. And so our ship docked at a dock down there, and I was assigned to shore patrol. That's where you're on a badge on your SP for shore patrol, and you're given a billy whacker. That's all. You don't have any guns or anything. That's the only thing you got. And ours was to patrol the streets of Tsingtao, China, which is a pretty good sized city. Matter of fact, the thing that amazed me most is I always considered that Tsingtao was kind of rural, you know, backwards. But the thing that amazed me is the fact they had moving stairs, you know. Stairs to the department store down there. And I never thought I'd see moving stairs at a place in China, but I underestimated. But to get along with the story, I worked all day, and we had to patrol the different places. We tried to check the food to see that what they were feeding was fit for our troops. And we tried to keep the fellows out of trouble, whatnot. And I went to it comes night time, and we had to report in at the Marine headquarters, which was on the other side of the island, which was a distance of about maybe 2 miles. So I got a rickshaw rider, and I told him where I wanted to go, but just by sign language. And so he took me down there. But when I got to the place, it wasn't dark yet, but he parked outside this. It was a real nice. It had a hotel, a fancy hotel, and I made it understood if he'd wait there at that dock, I would take care of, wait for me to come out. So he parked his rickshaw there, and he was waiting for me to come out because there wasn't any others available in the area. It's like having a cab. And as a result, I went in, and as you go in, there's a great big lobby. There's a wide, open stairway going up this side. I thought there was a wide one on this side, that there was a hallway. And I had to go up those stairs and down that hallway, and off to the left, they had bamboo. They pushed the curtain aside, and that's why I had reported to somebody there, I guess the Marines or somebody, that I was off duty and so forth, and that everything was okay. So I kept, all the time I was doing this, I'm climbing up the steps, and I kind of running down that hall. Boy, I hope that guy stays there. I hope he stays there, because I'd have to walk all the way back in the dark. I didn't know how they were going to treat me. So as a result, I checked out. Everything was okay. They secured me, so I was able to say, go back to your ship. So I took off running. There was a lot of chatter in the hall when I went. This big place when I went in. But when I come out, the tea was awful quiet. I didn't hear any noise, So what happened? So I thought, well, that doesn't matter to me. I'm going to get out of here. So I took out and I started running down these steps. And sure enough, they're all standing at attention, and somebody's coming up the steps. And I banged into this guy and hit him in the shoulder like this. And he was leading, And I looked to see what he did, and all I saw was one star. Oh. He was a Marine. And all the rest were at attention. And I didn't do that. Just let me go. He kind of stumbled. And I just ran right out of that thing and hopped out. I said, chop, 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 chop. And boy, they let me run like that. Because I thought she were coming after me. But I'll never forget that. But he got me back to the ship all right. It was kind of late. But then I had a pocket full of Chinese money and so forth. And I didn't know when we were coming back. I think maybe the next day for a while. But I took all my change, all my money out, and I gave it to the guy. His face lit up like a Christmas tree. He was so happy to get that much money, But he sure did me a great big favor.
Really? The fact that he stayed?
That later, the next day, we was on the Liberty. We went into town. And my buddy and I were both religious, and we saw up on this hill was a monastery. So let's go up there. So we walked up there, we knocked on the door, and they slid the panel, and they saw we were in uniform. They didn't know what to do, but they did open this big door to come in. I asked them, could we see their church? Mm-hmm. I told them we were in the island and so forth, and was visiting. Mm-hmm. And so we went into the church, and it was a great big, beautiful organ. I said, where did that come from? He said, Germany. I said, how'd they get that on ship? Those pipes were big. He said, they transported that by camel, or not camel, but over the land. They got it all the way over to here. But wow. I was so happy that we got to see him.
That's great. Well, we have enjoyed talking to you today.
Sorry I was so gaffy.
No, I'm enjoying it.
Once you get me started.
No,
I got to say, join the Navy and see the world.
That's right.
You'll love it.
That's right. So you would still advise people to do that, right?
Oh, yes. Okay.
Oh, yeah. If a young man were, considering the service today, that would probably be what you would advise. I would agree with you, actually.
Yeah, I didn't get much money. I think I got, I was getting $78 a month. I was a third-class petty officer, motor machinist mate.
That was a lot more money than that it is.
I had to send a allotment home to my wife, and if I gave $10, I was able to send a allotment to my mother. And my father was blind, and so they didn't have any income, so each one of us boys sent $10. They had an allotment to me, so took care of them during the war.
Wow, that is wonderful.
It was great.
You know, that